How many of you actually have read the report that I'm about to present? Show of hands, like half maybe. So a bit of historical context. My partners and I at Lightspeed wrote this report about the Southeast Asian technology ecosystem, and it was specifically written for founders. A lot of these reports that people have published over the last few years were mostly written for VCs. They were written for the LPs of VCs, and they're largely incentivized to paint a very, very euphoric picture. There's a lot to be excited, but we found that I've personally found as an ex-operator, for those of you who don't know me, I was co-founder and CEO of Gojek, and as an operator, I actually ran the business in many situations based off of a lot of these, very, very exciting euphoric reports that other companies, other firms wrote, and they actually turned out to be wrong. So we decided to publish a report. We published it a few weeks ago, and it's gotten very good traction, but I got a lot of hate. I got a lot of people messaging me about, hey, why are you doing this? This makes us look bad. Why are you so negative? I have one VC friend who now has refused to talk to me. He literally doesn't respond to my messages anymore. So it's been a pretty interesting couple of weeks of, I guess, discussing the topics in this report. And so, here, maybe before I go into a few sections that I think are most important for this audience, I want to give a brief personal reflection on, why I was excited to do this report. I'm not going to speak for my other partners who also created this, but for me personally, it was something that I found really cathartic. So Gojek went public in 2022 at a valuation of about $28 billion. Today, it's at about maybe about $4 billion, give or take. So still, obviously, a very, very good outcome. But going from expecting it to be a $28 billion company on the way to become a $50 billion company, on the way to becoming a $100 billion company, which is what a lot of us within Gojek expected, to actually coming down to where we are was something that was super painful. It was actually very, very painful, not just financially, but emotionally. Some team members took it very, very hard, and so it's something that I feel very deeply on a personal level on why did this disappointment happen, and that was actually the impetus to actually talk about the things that we talked about in this report. Why? Well, what happened? People like to speculate on U.S. interest rates or investor interest in the region, geopolitical tension, blah 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 blah, all that stuff, and all that stuff is true. It is true, but there's actually a deeper underlying reason why the underperformance happened, and this is what the report talks about. So these are actually the key takeaways, which are the underlying reasons why a lot of startups have underperformed relative to the expectations set over the last decade, over the last few years. One is, we've often been compared to be the next India and China here in Southeast Asia. We're not the next India and China. We're much smaller. We're still very large. You can still build very valuable companies, but we are not the next India and China. Those are very, very unique, very, very large opportunities. Second is, it's really important because of that dynamic to think regional. If you want to build a company that's going to be, let's say, more than $1 billion in terms of equity value, you do need to think regional. You can think maybe just one country, maybe, possibly, but most likely you'll have to think regional. The third is being realistic about who can pay. Who are you selling to? Is the TAM of Indonesia 270 million people? It's not. There's not 270 million people. It's very unlikely that there are 270 million people here in Indonesia who can pay for your product. There's probably very, very few consumer products that really address the needs of 270 million people. Maybe Indomie, Kopiko, and you gotta think at that level if you wanna hit this giant TAM. The fourth, and this one I've gotten the most hate for, the fourth is that I really do believe that Singapore is Southeast Asia's most important market, and we'll get into why later. Fifth, advertising, really, really important source of additional income because it means that you can extract more revenue from your customers without having them to pay. And last, as I mentioned, It's possible to build great companies. It's still possible to build big companies, but we really have to reset our expectations. Hence the title of the report, Resetting Expectations. I'll go through these quickly. So this first slide, talking really about India and China versus Southeast Asia. It's important to know that this is the most important thing that everyone needs to know when they're building a consumer company. It's really how many consuming class households are there. It's not the population size, it's how many people have a good enough income to pay for your product and for you to make money on that product without discounts, without subsidies. We've been drunk off discounts and subsidies over the past decade, but in reality, like you need to make money, investors need to make money, and you can only make money if people engage with your product, pay a fair price for it, and you make good margins off it. And these are the people who can give you that. It's the consuming class. And we define the consuming class as the population that earns more than $10,000 a year. Now, when you get to the 5 to 10K, you can still make money, but these are very value-focused users. You can probably get them occasionally to use the product. You can engage them with discounts, but unlikely that this will be where the lion's share of your profits come from. And then, below that, it becomes extremely challenging. Under 2K, you need to be really creative to figure out what you can sell to these people. So again, if you sell Indomie at a few thousand rupiah and can make 70% gross margin off it, great. But if you can't do that, that market there, the black bar, probably unreachable. And these are the key cities where the consuming class households live. So I made a huge mistake when I was running Gojek because I didn't think about this way. These are the key markets for a B2C product that you absolutely have to win. Once you get to the gray area, those are emerging cities. Definitely invest in winning those cities. And beyond that, I would say don't bother. I made the mistake of, for example, deploying millions of dollars into East Indonesia to expand Gojek. When you kind of think about East Indonesia or even think within Java, like a place like Cirebon. Do people in Cirebon really need food delivery? I mean, maybe some do, but can you really build a valuable food delivery business in Cirebon? Probably not. So why bother? So really pay attention to where the consuming class households are in Southeast Asia. And this is why thinking about income, thinking about wealth from an average perspective makes no sense. Don't think about averages. Think about distributions. I think this, by the way, this is generally a good tip as you kind of think about even stuff like customer cohorts and stuff like that. Averages are terrible. Don't use averages. Always look at distributions. And if you look at the distribution of income across different countries and even within countries, it's very stark. So be very mindful of this fact. If you want to say that, for example, you want to target 90% of Indonesia, you better be able to have a product that you can sell for somebody who earns 250 US or about 4 million rupiah per month. Right? If somebody who earns 4 million rupiah per month cannot regularly engage with your product and you can make money off that, then you're not addressing the market. And so when you actually break this down into, on a country-by-country basis, you can actually see that this is actually the distribution of power users, value-focused users, and today, currently unmonetizable users. And as you can see, different countries have different distributions. We've defined power users as, I think, users that have at least 20K of disposable income, right? So obviously, this is the cream of the crop. And so you see, like in Indonesia, for example, there's about 15 to 20 million people that can really spend. And if you actually look at all kind of consumer products, I'm not going to reveal anything too confidential, but if you look at any at-scale consumer product, they will mostly say that for consumer tech products, realistically, all of your profits are coming from 20 to 30 million people in Indonesia. And that kind of is reflected as well in the bar chart on the left, and concurrently the rest of the Southeast Asian countries. This slide was super painful for me. We competed with Grab for since the beginning, and I remember being in meetings internally talking about like, oh, you know what? Indonesia is all that matters. If you win Indonesia, you win everything. I remember specifically that sentence was uttered, and I cannot forget that moment because we were wrong. That is not true. Indonesia is not everything. And actually, when you look at, Grab's revenue, as you can see at the, it's a bad pointer, as you can see in Singapore's case, Singapore is 1% of Southeast Asia population, but it contributes 23% of Grab's revenue. Indonesia has 40% of population, but it contributes 29%. Now, yes, Indonesia is still the biggest market, but it's a lot more people to capture a lot less value, right? So again, Indonesia is an absolutely critical, important, largest market in Southeast Asia, absolutely. But if you can go to Singapore, you should try and win Singapore, because precisely for this reason. And as you can see, it's not just Grab. There's many, many companies here, as you can see on the other side of the screen, that are doing at least $50 million of revenue just in Singapore. And so there's this whole narrative around Singapore being tiny, it's a capped market. I deeply disagree with it. Yes, it's not a growing market, it's small, but it's very valuable. And if you can actually have a meaningful market share in Singapore, you can have a very meaningful, valuable company. But still things to get excited about. It's not all negative. First is penetration is still super, super low or kind of low across multiple different categories. There's still a lot of room to grow. But as we kind of talked about in the previous slides, you need to be a lot smarter on how to target them. Either A, you wait until the consuming class of Southeast Asia grows, you play the really long game, or alternatively, you build something that is appropriate for the market. You build something where people who are earning a few $100s a month can regularly engage with, or last option, you build for the top 10%. Be very, very clear on who you're targeting and how you're going to target them. The other thing that's still really exciting is that there's so much more technical talent. When we first started, it was so hard finding engineering talent, product talent, design talent, data science talent. But now, there's so much more availability of talent across the region, and that's really, really exciting. And we've actually also seen that over the last few years, online advertising has been a really, really, really great high-margin business. And it's a great way to actually extract more revenue from your users when you don't actually depend on your users' income. So that's actually been a really great new business model. And you start actually seeing this across the different companies in Southeast Asia. Here we're kind of displaying GoTo and Grab that are heavily investing in advertising as a high-margin business model. And that's it. I want to leave I have 2 minutes for Q&A. But again, I think I just want to leave you with the idea that we have to reset expectations around what is possible in Southeast Asia. There's still a very, very large market here. It's definitely, I personally am still very excited about the region. And I know for a fact that there'll be very, very valuable companies that are built in this region over the next decade. But we need to recognize the reality of how much money can people spend? Where are they? How do they spend? Where do they spend? And be really clear with who you're targeting and where. Being very clear, I'm a hardcore B2C consumer guy. I'm not going to speak too much about B2B. That's not my area of expertise. But when it comes to consumer, I have extremely high conviction that this is the right way of thinking about it. And if you want to learn more, please check out the report. You can probably look it up on Google or LinkedIn or whatever. But it's something that was really came from a lot of the painful lessons that I learned as a founder and CEO. So thank you. I'll leave the next minute or two for Q&A. Nothing? Really? 30 seconds?
Hello, I'm Ahmad from Astra International. You mentioned Singapore being as valuable as Indonesia value-wise, but what do you think are the differences between Indonesia and Singapore having very different, people, and of course the income is vastly different, and they have different characteristics. I think that's it.
I mean, that's true for not just between Indonesia and Singapore, but with any other country. There's different people, different culture, different habits. And absolutely, that is the challenge with building a really regional business. And that's something that in the early days we struggled with a lot. I think the first year of our international expansion, we just didn't really know how do we find the right people, how do we actually build the right product, what things do we need to modify. I'll give you one very simple example. Singaporeans, can I say this? Singaporeans complain 4 times more per capita than Indonesians. And Singaporean complaints takes 4 times more time to resolve compared to Indonesian. So actually, your capacity to actually problem solve a Singaporean customer is like 16 times between Indonesia and Singapore. And so that means having very low defect rates for your product in Singapore is super important. Your product needs to be really great, very reliable. Don't actually give a reason for a customer to complain. So that's just like one simple example. But yeah, there's many, and that's why it's hard. Cool. Any more? Cool. All right. Well, thank you. Check out the report.